Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Vision radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear.
Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners. This is Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission radio show. Thank you for joining us. Today is June 6, 2016, and where is the year going? As you know, on Mondays we interview activists and victims from the St. Louis area. This morning I'll be interviewing Larry Burgen, who he was one of the stars of the first Secret City. He is a St. Louis victim, and I actually had him on the phone right before we talked into the radio show. However, his mom came by and he needed me to call him right back. So that's what I'm going to do. Let me give him a phone call, see if he's ready. And if not, I will discuss a few things that I have on my mind about St. Louis. So hold on just one second. Let's see if we can add him into the group call. See what that happens here. And thank you for joining us. And this is pretty exciting. He's got some really great news.
Hello.
Hi, Larry. How are you?
I'm back.
Great. Thank you for joining us here on the Age of Fission radio show today. We are live on the air, and I just wanted to thank you for joining us. Let's introduce you again to the people who are listening to us. The way I found about you is that you were with the First Secret City. You were highlighted in the First Secret City, that documentary that was put together regarding St. Louis, correct?
Yes, ma'am. There was two documentaries actually came out this year, and I was highlighted in the second one. There's a brief mention in the first, but it was about the radiation in general in the St. Louis area, the different communities that were affected by different areas where it was processed and dumped, and they were very good films, both of them, and I recommend it to anyone out there who ever has a chance to see it, do so.
Yeah. So go ahead.
But the connection, again, is because St. Louis itself, it's not just one spot in particular that is harmful or hazardous to us living here. It's they didn't throw all their garbage in one pile. That's sort of, the easiest way to put it. They put it all around the community, and that's what keeps us, that's what we're in danger from today. That's what we're here talking about.
Yeah, it's still the Manhattan Project. No matter what, it's still the Manhattan Project waste.
Manhattan Project. St. Louis is the birthplace of radioactive production and waste in the entire country, if not the world. The very first nuclear chain reaction was done up in Chicago back in the 30s, as some of us know. Well, the feasible material that was produced for that was made here in St. Louis, and consequently, the radioactive waste and material in the buildings where this was all processed became dirty, and many people suffered from it.
You know, you're involved in litigation. You have taken, we were talking about this over the weekend a little bit when you told me that your town, what is the name of the town where you guys were affected? It's right across the river from St.
Yes,
Louis.
it's St. Louis is you can actually see the Gateway Arch from the factory I worked at and where these residents live. On the Illinois side, it's in the town of Venice, a very small community of about 2,000 people. And it's directly, this entire town is directly downwind from this factory that processed all this radioactive material for all these years. And the thing about this is very few people know about it. It's a well-known secret is the way I put it, because the only people know about it are the people who live here. But people outside the area, in your neck of the woods, in fact, never heard of it before. And that's the way these corporations wanted it.
Right.
Right. From not just the residents and employees, but from the world.
Right.
And me and a group of people are doing our best to make sure that secret doesn't stay a secret.
Now,
And
do you
documentary helps promote that.
It does, actually. But, you know, it's kind of hard. I was looking how made some efforts to try to get it played here in Eugene, and it's a small documentary. And unless it's being offered on the circuit, it's essentially going to cost about $2,500 to bring it to our little local movie theater. That's what the guy told me. I'm like, wow, that's a good way to keep a movie suppressed. That's what I thought.
This person who produced this and directed, they dedicated 6 to 7 years of their life to this film.
Wow.
Every penny was their money that they put into this. There was no outside donations or contributions. So they deservingly have the right to control and not release, not lose all the work that they put into it by not having it controlled with their copyrights. Now, the other documentary that came out, I believe it's actually even online, and it can be seen. It's called The Safe Side of the Fence, and that one actually is more easier to obtain and get copies of. And but again, it's more diverse, where the film we were speaking of, this shows our factory, our community, and the rest of the lakeside Coldwater Creek residents. The other documentary I was speaking of shows about 6, 7 different communities that have been contaminated around this area.
So it's not just those two communities, because with your community it makes 3. So this movie, The Safe Side of the Fence, is almost a must-see film if you want to be aware of what's going on.
That is, in a sense, a true documentary where it has a narrator. They show a picture of the factory. Someone who worked there or has knowledge speaks about it. Then it shows another picture of another factory and a narrator. And, and again, it's a true documentary in a sense. Whereas the one, the first Secret City, it doesn't have a narrator. It plays out more like a story, and it's much more palatable that way to me, so to speak. It's more easier to understand and feel than watching a documentary. Is more like a study group or a facts. But the other movie is more human. Mm-hmm. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does, actually. I appreciate that. So what I'm thinking about then is I'm trying to be clear here, because we're looking at this from an extremely objective point of view outside of St. Louis. So you were saying that there is actually other areas than your little town, than Coldwater Creek, than the West. Those are just the 3 that we're really paying attention to.
Yes.
There are several other sites around St. Louis or in separate cities?
Oh, yes, there is. In fact, I was attending a funeral of my cousin last year, younger than me, and I was sad. I had took my mother down to southern Missouri to see him. And while I was there, I ran into a cousin, many cousins I haven't seen in years. And one of them I had much more in common with than I thought. It turned out she was, as we were speaking, she was telling me how she was ill and her husband had cancer and her child was born with cancers and died, and she all related it to radiation exposure. Now, I've heard these stories 100 times before from these residents living here and from the employees, but this was the first time from my own family and from someone I haven't seen in years. And so when she told me her story, it was about her and her family living down in Hematite, Missouri. She told me that they had a small building down there that the government took lease over, and they processed plutonium of all things. Now, I don't know on what extent or what level, but they found out that they found traces of it in their yards in the community around this factory.
Oh, my God.
So a lady back then got the community together, they got attorneys, and they went after the company. Now, my cousin told me that she had to move away. They just couldn't live there anymore, and this affected them on a deep level. They lost their child. But the lady who was running this campaign to try to get help for everyone found an attorney who took charge of everybody's cases and went after this company. Her name was Miss Easton, Clarissa Easton. And the victims of hematite were victimized the second time. See, the attorney got them a settlement, and it was only $48,000 for each client.
Wow.
Now, according to Miss Easton, she said her home was worth $150,000, yet they couldn't sell it, and they couldn't live in it. This lawyer took advantage of these victims a second time.
Wow.
So, finding information like this is very, very useful in what we're doing in people around the country. Learn from other people's mistakes. So every attorney I found since I spoke to this woman, I've always made sure it was open-ended and that the clients had the opportunity of accepting or denying the claim. So for anyone out there who's going through this, listening to this, keep this in mind when finding an attorney or having one. Make sure they can't settle your claim for you.
Well, I would say that this whole issue of, I mean, you were
one of those small towns that we was just mentioning, Hematite, Missouri. You look this up, you'll see it. It's on the radiation radar map, so to speak.
Well, this is the interesting thing. I mean, the radiation radar map is interesting because we're talking about the St. Louis area, the whole Missouri area. I mean,
Hematite's only about 30 to 40 miles from St. Louis.
Right. Well, this
is all associated.
It's kind of like Radiation Central is in St. Louis area, isn't it? It's sort of like where they decided to focus it all on, although there are many sites, like in Tennessee, they started to build 10 or 12 nuclear power plants, and they only built a handful of them, which means more than half of them didn't get built, which means they have a lot of radiological...
Well, why didn't they localize this? If they were going to work with, why didn't they dump all their waste in one spot instead of in several different places? And, you can get a lot of different responses to that. One person told me, well, if you piled all this radioactive waste in one spot, it could go nuclear. And I never thought of that. It would probably cause a meltdown if you get too much in one spot of one type. But nonetheless, spreading it all over the St. Louis region was not the answer either. It's your responsibility of the people who use this to make sure not only their employees but the public is safe. And that's what went wrong over here at my factory over here in Venice. The residents, the most innocent of all. Now, some of his employees knew there was radiological material inside this factory, and we was all told it wasn't that bad. They downplayed it as much as possible. So we really didn't worry. But these residents, we had some knowledge. These residents had none, and they're the true victims. Mm-hmm. And just recently, we've had some radiation tests out of their yards taken, both the soil samples and readings. And in the soil samples, we found elevated levels of uranium. Now, this is very important because uranium was processed in our factory for over 4 years. In fact, I ran the same machine that processed this uranium for over a decade, so I know exactly how it was done and the levels.
What years did you do that?
I worked there from '89 to 2002, 2003, I believe.
And is that plant still open?
No. After I started becoming ill, after they removed the uranium dust from overhead, the company got rid of me and all the other employees and opened up under a new name. Once we started becoming sick because of our exposures, that's when the company decided to get rid of us before we figured it out and filed litigation. So they was hoping, we'd all go our separate ways, never fix, never notice, never find the answers, and die off. But that didn't happen.
Now, was Mallinckrodt the owner of this?
No, Mallinckrodt was the ones who brought the uranium to our factory. The factory I worked for was, at the time, back then, was Dow Chemical. They were a subcontractor to process uranium farm. This Mallinckrodt was able to process this uranium into what's called billets, which is another name for a round ingot. and then they would bring them to our factory where we would run it through a vertical press or a horizontal press, where it was like a Play-Doh play factory. You put a shape on one end, and you put the metal in, and you squeeze it out, whatever shape you want. And in this case, it came out from a large billet, an 18-inch round billet. It was squeezed down to a very small rod that would come out the far end. And I found out later on through a gentleman at a government meeting that these rods were used for nuclear reactors, for submarines, which all made perfect sense because these were processed during 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, which was the same time frame that nuclear submarines made their appearance. So all of this information just lined up perfectly.
But you were working there in '89, right?
But I started there years after they processed this. But the problem was, this was a billion-dollar company, Mallinckrodt, and this was a billion-dollar company, Dow Chemical. And after they processed this uranium on this press, Dow Chemical says, we need you to come in and clean this factory now. It's radioactive. Mallinckrodt's a billion-dollar company, says, no, it's your factory. You clean it. We paid you. And, of course, Dow says, no, we're not going to do it. It's your mess. So what did these two multi-billion giants do? They ignored it and left it.
What? Nobody cleaned it?
Until July of 2000, the uranium dust remained overhead, and it was detected at levels at 13.6 times above the safe limit.
Oh, my God. All these years, they knew...
It was raining down on top of me, my coworkers, and, in our foods, our drink, everything.
Were you working on uranium-related products at that factory when you were there?
There was thorium-related products. Now, they processed thorium for many years while I was there as well. And thorium is just as dangerous on some levels, if not, depending on what types and how it's done. It's a daughter product from the uranium, so it's right up there. And, in fact, they processed so much of this thorium that they had to remove 212 million pounds of it during one radiation cleanup.
Wow.
That's a lot. There's only 239 million people in the
Wait a
United
minute.
States.
I'm a little bit stunned by that amount. Yeah, like where was all this? That's a lot of product. Like
they dumped it on an empty lot next to the residents' homes. It was piled up as tall as a two-story house.
It was not like in a cylinder or a container. It was just poured.
No. It was just a loose powder dumped above ground. These residents over at Westlake Landfill, at least they had the courtesy to bury it under tons of soil. But here, these poor black residents in this neighborhood, they did a cost-benefit analysis, and it just was more cheaper to leave it sitting above ground than to spend money to cover it.
That speaks to the
residents
price.
Told me it looked like a sand dune whenever the wind would blow. It said it would look like, it would blow towards their yards and homes. It would cover their vehicles. Wow. And I sort of, when he said that to me, I was like, well, maybe. But what confirmed that was an employee who told me that when he was working there back then, he was told to go out there and put giant rubber tarps over it to try to keep the dust down. So he had to climb this mountain of radioactive waste, him and other employees, to put these tarps down and replace them whenever there was a storm or windstorm, as he told me. So that sort of verified the first resident story about it looking like a sand dune.
Is he sick, that man, right now?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, obviously. This speaks to why we have
He had children in that neighborhood who told us they would play on that mound, and many of them aren't here no more.
Wow.
The last one I spoke to had thyroid cancer, which is, again, associated with exposures, can be connected to a radiation exposure. He was, I think, on his 53rd, 54th chemotherapy treatment.
Wow. This speaks to why we have to revoke the Price-Anderson Act, because the Price-Anderson Act...
hold people accountable.
Yes, no one is held accountable. I mean, there's
not present for past indiscretions as well.
Yes, not just the thing is, all of the harm has been really perpetrated for such a long time. The harm is really, this is the worst part about the nuclear pollution. It doesn't just affect you right now. Even if you removed all of it instantly, magically took all of it away, your body is affected and your children's DNA is affected. You would not
believe how many grandchildren of relatives and employees and such I've found affected or issues related to this. I mean, 30-year-olds with heart attacks. 50. The oldest one I found was, I think, 57. His father worked there on that machine with me for many, many years. And then his son and grandson suffered many illnesses for years to follow. Now, this could be hereditary, but taking into account how many people worked at that factory have these same illnesses, the same descriptions, it's more of a link than anything else. Now, I know if it was had to be presented in a court of law, they would do all that. They would find out if there was causation due to hereditary. But from comparing it to all the other illnesses and all the other people in the factory, no, it has to be causational. In fact, my family would be a good example. All the birth defects and health problems and issues related to my family, yet my two sisters, an older sister, younger sister, completely healthy. Their children completely healthy. Their grandchildren completely healthy. There's a good pattern right there to measure this by, because this is the same way in many other families. A friend of mine, Andy, his children, birth defects, health problems. His sisters, brothers, they're all fine. So see, this is very typical of the way this radiation works. As you mentioned, it's a genetic deformity that lasts much longer than the radiation itself. One doctor told me, after being tested for radiation, he said, well, we can't find it in your lungs anymore. It must have passed through your body through natural, courses. I said, so that means I must be getting better from here on out, right? And he goes, not necessarily. You see, the damage it done while it was in there will still continue. And I asked, well, for how long? And he answered with one word, forever.
Yeah, well, not only just the damage, if all you need is one, from a plutonium, what's the number? 1/32 millionth of a gram is enough to cause cancers. I mean, you don't need a lot. It can float around.
That's plutonium. We're talking, if you even talk uranium or even thorium, it's still just a minuscule amount, a mote of dust. If you ever looked at a window,
it can sit
through a window, and you see this dust floating in the air, one of those flakes of dust is enough to wreak havoc with your entire body and kill you if it's radioactive.
That's right. And it can sit in your system.
The smallest flake of pepper you can see in a pepper shaker. That's what a mote of dust is.
Helen Caldicott says that the thorium, especially, it actually attaches to your bones, and it sort of sits there and wait for a long time. And it doesn't who knows when it begins to happen, but the incubation period is 4 to 80 years.
See, our government knows this, too. And it's not something they don't advertise. For instance, I found out after many years of research, that the statute of limitations in the state of Illinois for a worker compensation claim for any injury, mercury, lead, arsenic, any chemical, any poison, is 3 years from time of injury.
Wow.
Except one thing, radiation, is 25 years statute of limitations. The only thing. Now, our state representatives knew this. That's why they constructed this workers' comp claim like this. Our government knows this. They don't advertise it. It took me years to find this out. And we're close to getting compensation from many employees because of this.
So did they clean up the site? Is the site completely cleaned up?
I've been watching them over the years, how they progressed, how they did cleanups, and it was never really a cleanup. It was just enough to pass a certification, to allow them to resell it, the property, to keep from litigations happening. So they've never actually cleaned it up. They've done it in different spurts, so to speak, because they had to, not because they wanted to.
Wow.
I just found documentation several weeks ago which showed this company I work for took over 500,000 pounds of barium compound to a landfill. Well, our factory never processed barium, but it sure did have a lot of that waste left over. Now, could it be they actually took this radioactive waste and dumped it at a landfill, calling it barium? And keep in mind, this landfill we're speaking of is exactly a quarter mile from the Mississippi River and water intakes to the city of St. Louis. Nobody knows this.
When did that happen?
This happened back in 1989.
They bought barium and took it to a landfill? Why would they buy barium?
Barium compounds. See, if you add the word compounds, you can add other stuff to it, which could be the radioactive waste and sludge which is processed, which is a byproduct from processing this thorium. Wow. Yeah, it's amazing, the little things that you don't see at first. You know, it's the tree. You don't see a tree through the forest at first. And after studying this for years, we're still finding exposures today that just amazing. Like, for instance, the uranium that we found in the residence yards just recently. I sent copies of that uranium readings to a physicist, along with the uranium readings that were in my factory that was over my head all those years that they removed. And it turns out that it's the exact same type of uranium. Uranium here in the United States is very, very low grade. In fact, you can't even detect uranium-235 in the soil. It's so low, it's negligible. But in their yards, it's measurable. And the only other way you can do that is if it came from an outside source, which came from our factory. So we took the bar graphs we made from inside the factory and from the residence yards. We enlarged the resonance till they were to scale, and it turns out to be identical to the uranium processed inside. This physicist has said, yes, it had to be from that factory. So even after all these years, you know, now I'm finding out that the uranium played a part in these resonance exposures, not just the billions of pounds of thorium, but now the uranium. Oh, my God.
Well, they all go hand in hand. Are the residents taking action, or is it just the factory workers?
Well, actually, the residents don't know. They've been in the dark about this their entire lives, and that's the way these companies want it. Same as the employees. You know, all they told the employees for generations was, it won't hurt you. It won't hurt you. You wouldn't be working with it if it was dangerous. Yeah. That's how flippant it was. Yet, this thorium was spread all over the place like flour in a bakery. I seen barrels would be sitting up against a wall with oozing out stuff, you know, with cracks and rust and leaks. You know, this is just common, everyday.
You know what's I don't know. I mean, you're probably through this shock, Larry, because you've been dealing with this now for 8 to 10 years. But I find it shocking that our government is not actually on the side of the people. I mean, that they actually make every effort to side with the polluters, to side with the people who are causing harm. I mean, I know our government benefits from the uranium processing and things like that, but for goodness sakes, they have to be decent stewards of this product. It's the most toxic thing there is, and it's almost as if
who watches the watchers, right?
Well, it's unconscionable that uranium is allowed to be stored in an open site, in an open field, and not even a single elected official is jumping.
Not even a warning sign on a fence saying "keep out" or "danger."
Never.
Even to this day, there is still no signs on the fence.
Is it still there, or have they removed it?
According to the 2000, the United States Army Corps of Engineers took control of the site, and all radioactive materials and pursuant are now owned by the Army Corps of Engineers. Now, that's on that waste site, that lot next to their homes. Now, all the radiological material that's off that site in their yards reverts back to the responsibility of the original owners. Now, there is no statute of limitations as far as it still being in their yards, because, as an attorney once told me just recently, the crime is still in progress. It's still there. People are still being affected by it, harmed by it. So, therefore, statute of limitations for these residents cannot drop off. It's like, acquitting someone for shooting someone while the gun is still smoking. You just don't do that.
Well, have the people of that area been warned? Do they know about it?
Yes. Our committee has done so much over these years to try to raise awareness to this problem.
What's the name of your committee?
The very first story written about us was by C.D. Stelzer. He's a journalist who writes a lot of stories about environmental problems and situations here in the St. Louis area. And he called our committee a committee of concerned citizens. And we felt that fit, so we took that name as for our group, the Committee of Concerned Citizens.
Okay.
And for years, we met up at the mayor's office and on weekends, and all the residents or whoever could make it would come up there, and they would provide us whatever information they could on health problems, issues, anything they saw or heard. And after years and years of collecting information, we acquired well, proof. I don't know how else to put it, but proof of what was done to these victims.
And has the
it
government
took a community to bring it together.
Are there elected officials working with you now to help get some compensation or to remediate the area, or what action is going on in that community?
Well, again, when it came to the state helping us, we tried to avoid that situation where Westlake Landfill and those Coldwater Creek residents were relying on the state officials, state government to help them. We knew over here in Illinois, our state is bankrupt. It's broke. We have a very bad finances right now in the state of Illinois, and I knew there would be difficulty in trying to find a government official, a state official, who could help us or had the means to. So we've been trying the opposite and going through legal aspects of trying to get the compensation and resolution for these residents, where, we try to learn from other people's mistakes. And if it wasn't working for the Westlake Landfill people, I didn't think it'd work for us as well. So that's why we've been going through attorneys. And I believe we have one that stuck now. We're meeting with them again on the 14th in another week. And this is a follow-up appointment with everything that we've shown and acquired. And as Calvin, our co-chairman, I'm a chairman of this committee, Calvin's our co-chairman, he told me, as he said, I believe this is our best chance yet of getting some compensation for these residents, because now we have more documentation than we've ever had before when we went before an attorney, and for the first time ever, we have radiation readings. So we have a really good feeling this time with this new lawyer that we can get some type of compensation for these residents and, at the same time, credibility with our concerns.
Well, what's interesting is that you have to even be questioned about your credibility when there is mounds of documentation that uranium mining. The reason that uranium is even, regulated is that when it first came out, it was pretty much unregulated, like coal.
Oh, it's like gold miners, yeah.
Yeah, and people were dropping off like flies, and our Congress got freaked out and passed some laws to regulate this. It is unequivocal that it is harmful. It's unequivocal. So it's really, I find it unconscionable that you guys have to defend yourselves. And
well, that's the nature of what you just said, because the government put it in a way, as this attorney told me, he says, if you found dioxin in your front yard, just a small amount, doesn't matter how much, and you had a cancer, you can almost unequivocally prove that it was caused by a dioxin. It was some other contaminant. You can almost count, there is no way they could defend against that cancer being caused by that pollutant. But when it comes to radiation, here's where they say, well, wait a minute. Let's see what type of radiation it is. Let's see how strong it is. Let's see how close you was to it. How many times a day? Let's do the math to see if it poisoned you. It's one of the only contaminants I've found where a mathematical calculation has to be determining your illness from it. And that's, again, to the government's credit, trying to diffuse the importance of what their need is for this toxic material.
Well, look, does
that make sense?
It does. It does. But you know what's really unconscionable is the fact that they need to justify murder. That's essentially what they're doing. This is warfare on the American people, the way I see it. I mean,
now,
this is an
I know
unconscionable
you use that word
act.
a lot, and I like to, respectfully disagree. But in some instances, absolutely, you are on the mark. If you look at the journalist over in England who was poisoned by polonium and died within a week, now he was murdered with radiation. There is no doubt about that. Was it done by a Russian agent? More than likely. He was criticizing the Russian government. But is he the first? I believe not.
No, but you know what I mean by murder, Larry.
But here's again,
Look,
that was intentionally murdered. What I'd like to believe was we was killed unintentionally. In other words, in our instance, they would say, well, we hope they don't get sick from it. And when someone does, they're going to say, well, we hope they don't get real ill. And when they do, then they go, well, we hope they don't die. And when they do, they say, well, we hope it wasn't related to what we were doing. So it's all hope as far as these corporations and
look, Larry, this is why I call it murder. It's hope based on lies. This is like
it's hope based on lies.
This is like This is like saying that a batterer who beats the daylights out of his wife almost to the point of death says, "God, I hope she doesn't die." He's still a murderer. These people have intentionally killed, not only just murderers, they're murderers and maimers. Because what they are doing is intentionally ignoring a known pollutant and neglecting it. It's not, I get it that we have all this nuclear pollution and there's not much we can do about it.
But what drives that? There's one thing that drives money is what drives that. If it wasn't for that dollar involved with radiation and its uses and productivity and whatever, it wouldn't even be here.
It's not just...
But it's the money associated with it.
If
you have more money to fight it, we'd be a better off nation. We'd be a healthier nation, safer nation. But the powers that be who control it, control politicians as well and the vote when it comes to these things. And this is where us, the lowly old, bottom of the rung, middle class, lower class, can have a voice. There's many more of us than there are these corporations.
There are many more of us. And this is why they work so hard on making people believe that the radiation just isn't that harmful. And they blame people. I mean, honestly, even as far as what this ridiculous new argument about the Zika virus, I firmly believe that those microencephaly cases that are on an epidemic are caused by uranium mining, not the Zika virus, because the World Health Organization did those studies, and they are censored. The World Health Organization is censored by the International Atomic Energy Agency. The other thing that makes me believe that is in South America, where all these
mines are.
Yeah. Did you know that uranium mining just started happening there in 2012? Lo and behold, 3-4 years later, we start getting microencephaly cases. And now they're yes.
I understood that they started, but I had no idea it was that early. I mean, I thought it was years ago.
No, they only opened up the South American uranium mining industry in 2012. They started actually uranium mining in 2013, and coincidentally, every single one of those little towns that had microencephaly was where there was a new uranium mining facility. So I don't have the documentation in my hand from the World Health Organization and their structure of how they built their.
They won't let you have the actual numbers.
Not only that, but I would like to see how they came up with what we're going to look at and what we're going to exclude. I can almost guarantee you they were told to exclude radiation or any uranium. Do not discuss it at all. And so they came up with this ridiculous Zika virus. 18 cases out of 4,000 Zika, 18 cases of microencephaly out of 4,000 cases entirely. 18 were affected by Zika, and now we're trying to ask the American government to give the Zika virus millions of dollars. It's a billion. It's a shakedown. It is such a shakedown, and Americans need to pay attention. This is, the International Atomic Energy Agency and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and evidently the EPA, have no regard for human life, as we have seen repeatedly throughout our country.
If they had regulation to at least give us a safe feeling, warm, safe feeling, it would be, at least they'd be on their job, they'd be on their toes. They could find hot spots that nobody knows are out there. But they're not looking. They're not actively looking for those. And for an example, I just came across a long-lost letter I lost maybe 10 years ago of an employee who told me back in the 60s when he was running this uranium in our factory. He told me he took home a Dixie cup full of saw chips, and they were uranium. And he sat out on his shelf in his garage for years and years, and then one day he was cleaning out his garage, and he tossed them out back by his garden. This should have never left the factory.
Oh,
there should have never
God.
been any saw chips. There should have never, never have been possible. Again, lack of oversight, lack of regular, and I'm not talking just the government. This company who was processing it and allowing it to be processed there, they should be the one held accountable. And I'm going up there in the next week or two when the weather breaks. I got a small Geiger counter I got from an Army surplus store, and if we could find these uranium chips, then again, let's hope one other family will be saved from it. Because when he died many years later, after he told me the story, I always wondered if it was from his exposures in that factory, from those chips, or from the food he ate out of his garden where he threw them.
Probably both. What did he die from? What did he die from?
Oh, multiple illnesses and cancer.
Yeah,
in fact, last day he worked there, he was actually carried out on an ambulance stretcher.
Oh, my goodness gracious, really?
Yes, yes. And
Now,
again,
is this facility still open, Larry?
yes, it is. It's under a new name, like I mentioned earlier. After they got rid of all the employees, they're now opened up as a non-union factory, which means when they tell them jump, they have to say how high. When they say this isn't safe, the owner says too bad, go ahead, because now they're non-union. And so they're probably getting away with much more now than they could back when I was there.
What's the name of the company now?
It's called Magnesium Electron North America.
Magnesium Electron North America. And it was
And the half owner of this, he had joined him in this company, is a billionaire from England who I found out owns a beryllium mine. Now, why is this important? Is this factory also processed beryllium from 1960 to the year 2000. I actually had an ingot, a small bar of it, sitting on my desk as a paperweight at one time. And beryllium is a Category 1 carcinogen. It, too, went up in smoke, out the exhaust fan, and across these residents' yards and homes. We have several people living on this one block that have sarcoidosis. I looked it up on WikiLeaks, and sure enough, beryllium disease and sarcoidosis is identical to define in its health. It's an identical illness. So many people are misdiagnosed, as these residents were, who were all diagnosed with sarcoidosis. In reality, they all have beryllium disease.
Wow.
And again, this is, this is what this factory was able to get away with all these years. How can you pile up millions and millions of pounds of radioactive waste and not have a warning sign on the fence?
You know what's really, I don't know if this thought has occurred to you, Larry, but it's almost as if all of these systems that were set up for the benefit of the American public after World War II were really there to set up to protect the crimes, the oncoming crimes that they knew they were going to do, that they were going to process these things without regulation.
Oh, yes.
You know?
I have proof of that in some ways. I have the original contract from this factory. This factory was built to assemble Army tanks for World War II, and afterwards it was sold to Dow Chemical, the company that processed this thorium and uranium. And in this contract, on the very last page of the contract, it states that Dow will have unlimited use of all uranium and thorium on this property. So our government gave them a pat on the back and said, go ahead, go get them, with using this radioactive material. Now, when our government said they could do this, they should have walked out to this factory, looked around at these residents' homes, and said, should they do this? But they never did.
Yeah. Or even regulated them.
Well, I'm sure corporations' greed played a part in this. I'm sure Dow Chemical themselves, oh, yeah, we want to do this. We can do this. We can do this. Never once given a second thought to what happens afterwards.
Well, so then this is where you get into this. How many people that are maybe even are listening to this radio show have investments in Dow Chemical stocks? You see, this
and Mallinckrodt.
And Mallinckrodt. You know what I mean? Like, this is the issue. Is like, at what point do Americans decide they're not going to participate with these people? Their stocks are increasing. The government is not regulating them. And yet everybody feels like as long as they're all making money and getting rich and they can live their lifestyle, it doesn't really matter how many people get sick and how much of the earth gets destroyed. I mean, it's
a dollar with these corporations. It's all about the money.
It's not just the corporations. See, I'm sort of into divestment. I don't think anybody should have a single stock in Dow Jones, Mallinckrodt, or any of these.
Well, even if you took your stock out today, they would still profit. And I'll explain how this worked with me. When I was at my worst illness and I couldn't walk, I was being prescribed morphine from my doctors. And the morphine I was buying was from Mallinckrodt Pharmaceuticals. So here is a company who poisoned me, now profiting from that illness. Talk about cosmic irony.
That's a win-win
So see, there's still ways that they can profit, even if you was to sell your stock, or there you go.
You still have to buy their products just to get well.
Or stay alive in some cases.
Gosh darn it, doesn't that make you spit nails?
Well, I laughed when I came across this because I had to. if I think about it or dwell on it, it takes you to places you don't want to go.
Well, this is why, like, for me, I openly call them murderers and maimers, because this is murdering people. It's murdering your grandchildren. It's killing us. And we have to be unequivocal about this. It's kind of like I had this conversation over the weekend about 350.org, that guy that Bill McGivens is out there saying we need to rely on nuclear power for the next 10 years to get off of fossil fuel. And I said, either he's the laziest environmentalist I've ever seen in my life, because post-Fukushima, anybody who knows about nuclear, even me, and I'm not...
The safest reactors were the ones that blew up in Fukushima.
Right, and they are all leaking. We have a huge nuclear
Still
mess.
Today, they're still emitting radiation.
Honestly, anybody looking at it, when you look at it, we have thorium pouring into New York City. Every single one of our nuclear power plants are having massive catastrophic issues. They're all falling apart.
Right.
And there is no money from the states or the feds to keep propping them up. And for him to say we need to pour billions of dollars in it, he's either bought out from the nuclear industry, or he is the laziest environmentalist I've ever seen in my life. I went to the 990 forum. Do you know he says he only works 3 hours a week for 350.org, and he's considered our guru of climate change? We have got to just get smart, like you did, Larry. You got smart about what you were doing.
You have to self-educate. You have to learn. If someone won't tell you, find out. If you want questions answered, find the answers. Because no one's going to give them to you, especially these corporations who did this to you. These companies never told what they did to me and my coworkers. And if you're out there listening to this, I'm certain they wouldn't tell you what you're being poisoned by either.
Well, even our own states. I mean, honestly, like here, we're going to file a Freedom of Information Act up in Washington. We know they're testing the fish in the Columbia River. We know it. They're testing them. Call up Washington State and ask them, can you give us those test results on the fish? They'll say they're not available. We're still doing it. Since 2012, they've been testing the fish. They're going to say that they don't have conclusions yet. So we're going to have to take action. And this is the issue. It's just like with your case is, it's interesting how, this is what I mean, Larry. When I heard about St. Louis, to me, St. Louis is the United States. It is us. We are all there. This web of deceit and poison is, it got a tentacle all over this country. And
yes, it is.
Anyone who thinks that their area is unaffected, think again, because we are all St. Louis.
I mentioned it in that documentary that this radiation in St. Louis is like a tree. The trunk of the tree is Weldon Springs, the Mallinckrodt, where they manufactured and processed this uranium, and our factory and Westlake landfill and hematite, and these are all branches leading from that tree. But the problem is, there's trees like this all over the country with its branches leading everywhere. Washington, state of Washington. Oh, good Lord, there's several trees with its branches leading many different areas of radiation contamination. New York, again, they manufacture it, they process it there, and then there's other waste sites around it. These have to be addressed because it's an invisible poison. If you could see this, if it was colored purple, and people could see smoke or dust on the ground, they would be horrified of how much of this is out there, and it's accessible to everyday people. But you can't see it. It's invisible poison. You can't smell it. And because of that, you don't take notice. It's there, you just don't think about it. And that's where we have to change the mindset of the public, that you're looking for something that's not there. You have to, because no one else is looking for you. The government isn't. Only if you bring it to their attention, only if you raise enough stink about it, will it finally garner some action by the government or state to handle a situation like over here at Westlake, which they still haven't. They have a ground fire burning under a dump towards radioactive waste.
If not at the radioactive waste.
And they're waiting to see what to do about it.
Right. And people are dying, literally dying every week from this waste in St. Louis.
Oh,
That's
yes.
the
It's
sad.
not just from here, but all across the nation.
Yes.
And our factory was approved for a government cancer fund for cancers strictly caused by radiation. And over 188 families have received up to $28 million so far. Well, these are just the cancers that we know of. There's many families out there unaware of this fund or may have passed away, never able to file a claim. Many other cancers that weren't diagnosed. There are many, many more in this factory who will be left out because of time and because of the way this poison works. And I think I was fortunate enough to jump on the bandwagon quick enough for this workers' comp claim to get some compensation and help for these victims nowadays because, as you know and many others out there listening, it takes money for therapy, medicines, medical treatments, things of this nature.
Yeah.
And if you're already sick because of this radiation, you don't have the money for those medical treatments, for that medicine. And these are the victims who go first.
Mm-hmm.
Where
are you guys with your case? What's the status of your case? What's going on with your case?
Oh, it's very close to a conclusion right now. We just got done. We got mathematical aspect of it done. The analytical data's done. And all we're waiting for now is the physical, which should be, I'm saying, within weeks, if not days. And that's the finalize my comp case. Now, once that's done, that's the second window of opportunity for compensation for these employees. The cancer fund being the first door of opportunity, but if you don't have cancer, but you've been poisoned by this radiation, you have illnesses associated with it, then the workers' comp is the second door of to be able to walk through to get help.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be considered a landmark decision. I'll be the first person in the state of Illinois to receive workers' comp for radiation poisoning from a nuclear production facility. Now, I find that amazing to be able to say that statement considering how many employees have already received compensation through the cancer fund. But no one ever thought about workers' comp. I guess I was just lucky enough to stumble across that and open up the second door of opportunity for help.
So this is what you're involved in is a workers' comp case?
Yes,
Okay.
right now. And afterwards, then I want to go after the owners on a civil case. If not, I'm actually speaking with the Attorney General actually last week for environmental crimes in the state of Illinois. And he's closely watching the Department of Natural Resources in Missouri. We believe we found radioactive waste from this factory has been transferred over across state lines and buried down in southern Missouri. I spoke with an environmental investigator. We're working together to try to find this machine, the same machine that I worked on in the factory, the same machine that processed all that uranium for years and years. This machine is missing.
What?
And we believe that it was cut up in small pieces, snuck out of this factory, which is a government defense contractor, by the way, snuck out of this factory across state lines and buried down south. And we're really close to finding that press now. And once we do, we'll be able to go after the owner, charge him with a felonies, and then, if he is convicted of a felony, have his government contractor's license revoked, his government defense contractor's license removed, and possibly closing that factory down.
Wow, that would be
all
a big
the years
victory.
of trying to help anyone, this is my first chance or opportunity I've seen in able to shut them down once and for all from producing any more poison and pollution.
That factory is still operating every single day.
Yes, ma'am.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
What a crime. And yet there are elected officials who want to close this down?
No. In fact, they always want to stay neutral. We actually, when I was working there back then, I actually had a Congress come in and shake people's hands before an election. No big deal. Everybody thought everything was fine. Everybody was working. Everybody was making money. Nobody saw any problems. It wasn't until all the health issues started surfacing, and after we look back, hindsight, okay, was he there to get votes, or was he there to garner favor with the factory, with the companies?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I
It's
wonder
hard to tell.
Well, I wonder if his exposure that one day of glad handing actually landed him some cancer. I wonder if he's got.
Well, funny thing about this, Congressman, later on, I got him to write a letter of approval to the Agency of Toxic Substances and Disease Registry on our behalf, asking for to test this neighborhood and these residence yards. What I did was I made it public. I met with one of his assistants, showing them about the radiation and all these cancers in this neighborhood and the radiation that they processed, and we wanted them to show it to the congressman, asking for his help with his petition. Well, 2 days after we had this meeting, I met with a newspaper reporter, and I set this up on purpose, and told him that we met with Congressman Costello's aide and passed on all this information with him needing his help. So when the newspaper story came out, it mentioned our meeting with the congressman, and it mentioned that the congressman knew this problem. So 2 days after the paper came out, the congressman's aide called me and says, yeah, we'll file a petition like you asked. So what I did was, according to C.D. Stelzer, he says I forced his hand into doing this. First, I told him of the situation, then made the public aware that he knows of it. Then he had no choice but to
right
on our behalf. And it was a little trick I picked up somewhere. I heard somebody, years ago, a politician did, and I tried it, and it worked. And Carl Stelzer, C.D. Stelzer, asked me, he goes, you forced his hand into doing this practically. And I go, well, you have to. They're not doing it on their own. They're not taking matters in their own hand when it comes to this type of material, radioactive material.
Now, do they talk to you, these elected officials, when you go to their office? I mean, do they have conversations?
Yes, they do,
about this?
but it's all more or less storefront. It's all like, well, at least we did meet with them. Did you do anything? Well, their all excuses always, we don't have enough information at this time. But if they say, well, we did meet with them, it sounds like, okay, we're on their side, but we're just not going to do anything. It's a politician's double talk. They will meet with us. They will discuss it, but will anything happen from that? Usually not. Not from my experience.
Yeah, usually not. I mean, they're pretty much.
Not.
I mean, my senator Jeff Merkley actually produced legislation to modify the Price-Anderson Act. That was one of his first things he did when he got elected. You know who kept it from going to the floor of the Senate? Our liberal congressman, Ron Wyden, and the very conservative Mitch McConnell. They wouldn't even let it be discussed.
See, and that's again hypocritical of Mr. McDonald, because he was all for this NIOSH Cancer Fund, the one I just mentioned, to be for a factory being approved in his state to get this government cancer fund. Oh, he was all for that then.
Yeah, they want the cancer fund because the money goes in their state, but they don't want to have any of these CEOs.
But they don't want to do anything to punish the corporation.
Yeah, they want the human beings who are causing these crimes to be able to just
run ramshot. They don't want to spend any money on finding any more problems caused by it. They don't want to remediate any of the problems that were caused by it. It's politics, and it's very disgusting in a lot of ways.
Well, the sad part about it just being a political, I mean, somebody said this to me, well, we don't want to be political. I do not personally think that the nuclear pollution is a political issue. It crosses all political boundaries. And for them to continue to say it's political, it's not political. Let's be clear. It's about warmongering. It's about us continuing to feed the war machine. We cannot say we want to end nuclear because we want to have the $13 trillion or whatever it is we're going to pour into the upgrading our nuclear weapons. I mean, America has to be the biggest gun on the world, and that's their attitude.
Why? Yeah, but their answer is, no one ever asked that question. Why?
Right. Why do we need to do that? Good question. I have no idea. But you know what, Larry? We have about 30 or 45 seconds left on the show. It has gone so fast. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you'll come back.
I'm sorry I had to, in many ways.
Well, I hope that you will come back in maybe 4 to 6 weeks and update us on your case, and we can continue this conversation because I find it very stimulating, and you always bring us great information that opens up our eyes a little bit more. I really appreciate it.
People have to know about other situations around the country, different cities, different aspects on the victims, on what they're doing to find help or compensation, to find ways to remedy the problems. And having shows like yours is one of the many helpful tools that are needed out there to do this, to get this done.
Okay.